I would like to welcome you to today's webcast, Advanced Persistent Threats, Cutting Through the Hype, which is sponsored by NitroSecurity. Today's webcast is on an important and timely topic. Advanced persistent threats are one of the most talked about issues in cybersecurity today and the most misunderstood. Stealthy, prolonged incursions deep into critical IT systems by deliberate adversaries are both sensational media headlines and a critical issue at the top of federal agendas. From recent U.S. intelligence reports that detail nation-state-sponsored espionage to the Operation Shady Rat and Stuxnet-like worm attacks, the U.S. is carefully evaluating the state of advanced attacks and even adapting policy to encompass the use of offensive cyber attacks in response to external threats. In today's webcast, you will find out about the dangers of advanced persistent threats and why some organizations are well prepared, but most are not. You'll also learn some pragmatic processes to assess and identify internal vulnerabilities, as well as insights on best practices proven effective on the front lines and the new rule-less correlation and analysis technology that automates detecting and deciphering critical clues. Our speakers and subject matter experts for today's webcast are John Oltsik, Principal Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group and founder of its Information Security and Networking Services. John has been in the technology industry for well over 20 years. Prior to joining ESG, he was the founder and principal of Hype-Free Consulting. John has also held senior positions at Giant Loop Network, Forrester Research, EMC Corporation, and Epoch Systems. We also have with us today Mel Shakir, CTO of NitroSecurity. Mel serves the office of the CTO at NitroSecurity, where he brings over 15 years of experience in software development and management, information security, and database technologies. He is responsible for developing and implementing NitroSecurity's overall technology vision and roadmap, including next-generation application and database security management solutions. Now, before we get started, I want to go over some housekeeping items. At any time during the webcast, if you would like to submit a question, just look for the Ask a Question console. There will be a Q&A session towards the end of the webcast. As a reminder, please turn off your pop-up blocker before the start of the presentation so you can optimize your viewing experience. And we also recommend that you enlarge the slides on your screen to make them more viewable. We will also have a couple of poll questions for the audience, so please take a moment as they appear on your screen to provide your answer, and we will tabulate the results and share them with you when we receive them. Finally, after this session is complete, we will be emailing to everyone a link to the archived version of this webcast so you can view it again or share it with a colleague. And now I'd like to turn it over to John from ESG.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to present some data on advanced persistent threats, and the data I present is actually a subset of the data in the recently published ESG report titled U.S. Advanced Persistent Threat Analysis. If you want more information on that, that's on the ESG website at www.esg-global.com. The report I wrote, the report was, as I said, was published in November, but the research was actually conducted in August of 2011. And the genesis of this project was that I was doing a number of different projects that involved research on APTs, and I went out and looked for third-party research on the subject and didn't find any. So as a result, ESG conducted a project on its own. This is a survey. The data I'll show you is based on a survey of 244 IT security professionals in North America, although we did a similar project in Western Europe as well. The data focused on enterprise organizations, and enterprise being defined as 1,000 organizations with 1,000 employees or more. And this data is across all industries. So to be clear, it is not a study of federal agencies or defense and intelligence agencies, but it spans all private sector and public sector types of businesses. I am going to present the data through a segmentation model. I'll present the data in total and through a segmentation model. We used some of the inputs of the responses that people gave us to build this segmentation model. So based on their inputs, we gave them a score, and based on their total score, we put them in one of three buckets. Most prepared companies for APTs, or most prepared for APTs was 21%. Somewhat prepared for APTs was 43%, and poorly prepared for APTs was 36%. So once again, just to be clear, this was an ESG segmentation. We didn't ask respondents to tell us if they were prepared for APTs based on their responses to things like how much executive management was involved in their security processes, how much they were investing in security technologies, whether they had oversight over what they felt like there was their total infrastructure. Those are the way we segmented this market. So now, moving on to the next slide. If you're doing research on APTs, you have to be concerned with the term APT. Because unfortunately, the term has been co-opted and it's become a marketing term in many senses. So we started by presenting the NIST definition of APTs, which you see in front of you. And I'm not going to read that, but and I can see that, I don't know if you see what I see, but the NIST logo is over some of the definition in my slide. But suffice it to say, what we wanted to do was get everyone on the same page so they knew exactly what we were asking them about and exactly what we were talking about. So once we presented them with this definition, we asked them if they were familiar with APTs based on this definition. And as you can see on my bullet here, 42% said that they were very familiar, and 58% said they were familiar. Anyone who was unfamiliar with APTs was thrown out of the survey. So the data you'll see is particular to people who are familiar with APTs as it relates to the NIST definition. Now, beyond familiarity with APTs, we also wanted to understand what these security professionals, or what the organizations that these security professionals worked at, were doing in relation to APTs. So we made sure that the people we surveyed not only were familiar with APTs, but had some influence on making security purchasing decisions, making security strategy decisions, etc. And the reason why we did that is we wanted to know how APTs were affecting their security decisions. So with that, let me go on to some of the data. A fundamental argument as I went into this research was, are APTs anything new? There is a lot of people who would say APTs are new. It's a new type of threat. It's persistent. It's targeted. You have people who are looking for specific data, and they're willing to take their time, use their resources, and exploit as many vulnerabilities and use as many threat vectors or attack vectors as they feel are necessary to steal the data. If that takes a week, that's great, and if it takes a year, they're willing to hang in there. Well, when we asked this question, are APTs unique, what we saw was about 50% of the population said, yes, they're unique. And just under that, about 48% of the population said they're somewhat unique, but they're similar to past types of attacks. Only 2% said that APTs were not unique. Now here I'm going to show you this data again, but now this is through the lens of our segmentation model. And what's interesting to me is that those that are most prepared for APTs, which is represented by the green bar, were the most likely to tell us that APTs are a unique type of threat. To me, this is very illustrative because it says basically that those who understand these types of threats the most are the ones who would consider them unique. So that's a bit of a scary metric, and that's a consistent scary metric that we see throughout the research. So the feeling is generally that APTs are unique or somewhat unique. We also wanted to understand whether people believed if they were dangerous or not. So we asked them, are you concerned about APTs? And this was really a specific question we asked. Given what you know about APTs, are you concerned about APTs' impact on national interests And we gave them specifics like the economy and national security. And again, to me, this is alarming that 93% of those surveyed, once again, security professionals working at enterprise organizations, were either extremely concerned or concerned about the potential impact of APTs on national or vital interests like national security and the economy. Now, once again, let me show you this data through our segmentation model. And what you see is that those that were organizations that were most prepared for APTs are also those that are most concerned about the impact of APTs on U.S. national vital interests. So again, the more you know about APTs, the more concerned you are. And I can relate this anecdotally to conversations I had with CISOs who told me, we didn't think these things were unique or as dangerous as everyone else talked about until we experienced an APT. And then we realized what we were up against, the sophistication, the persistence, the skills that the adversary possessed. So APTs we're finding are unique and dangerous, and those people who know the most about these things are also the most concerned. So that's sort of the opinion-based data that I'll present today, and as I mentioned, this is a subset of what I had. But before I move on, all of these opinions really don't matter if APTs aren't effectively penetrating organizations. So let's go to a polling question here.
Thanks, John. And as John indicated, we have our first poll question for the audience, and it should appear on your screen. And that question is, based upon what you know about APTs, do you believe your organization has been the target of a previous APT attack? So pick the answer that fits your organization. Is it yes, likely, unlikely, or no? And we'll pause here, let our audience respond, and then share those results with you. And again, wanting to know if you believe your organization has been the target of a previous APT attack. So pick the answer that fits your organization, and we will share those results. And we have them now on the screen. It looks like the majority, 37.1%, said likely, that you're fairly certain that you have been targeted in the past. There seems to be an almost split in the next category, a slight edge to those saying yes. 26.6% say yes, we are certain we've been targeted. 25.7% saying unlikely, that you don't believe you've been targeted, and then 10.4% saying no, we're fairly certain we have not been targeted. So, John, what's your take on that in terms of results? Is that something you see and predicted?
Well, actually, I'm going to go on to my next slide and show you that that is very, very consistent with what we saw in the general market in our survey of 244 security professionals. So we asked the exact same question that we just presented to this audience with the exact same responses or response choices to our audience. And what we saw was that 59% said that they were either certain they'd been targeted, or they said it was likely that they were fairly certain they'd been targeted. And that compares to just about 53% of this population. So actually, is it 50 or 60? It's 60. Yeah, so it was slightly higher in this survey. So the point here, and this was really what we wanted to learn in our research, was we asked the opinion questions of whether APTs were unique or whether they were dangerous, and then we moved on to, well, are APTs impacting companies? And the answer in our survey and research was yes, and once again today it's yes. So these things are very, very pervasive and are making an impact. Similarly, in our research, we wanted to understand if organizations felt they were vulnerable for future APT attacks. And here's our research breakdown. What we found was that 30% of those respondents, of the 244 security professionals surveyed said that they were either very vulnerable or vulnerable, while 45% said, well, we're neutral, but my organization is as vulnerable to an APT as it is with other types of security attacks. Now, I should also point out, because I don't have this slide here, when we did use our segmentation model, what we found was that the organizations who claimed to be either very vulnerable or vulnerable typically were those that were most prepared for APTs. So you would think, logically, if you're not prepared, if you're poorly prepared for APTs, you would claim you're vulnerable. If you're very prepared, you would claim that you're not vulnerable. That wasn't the case. People who are most prepared understand how dangerous APTs are and what types of attack vectors they use, and they're the ones who are saying, even though we're prepared, we still believe we're vulnerable. So this slide summarizes a lot of the other data that we captured, because we also wanted to know, what are people doing about APTs? If they think they're dangerous and they're vulnerable, what are they doing? So what we learned is that 77% of those we surveyed will increase their spending on security training, services, and technology as a result of APTs. Some will increase it more than others. In fact, what we found was those organizations that are most prepared for APTs are the ones most likely to increase their spending by the greatest percentage. So again, you can be very prepared, but you understand where you're not prepared and you're willing to spend accordingly. 47% of the cases, APTs had caused the executive management team to take some type of action. So 2 comments about that. 47% is probably good. It's better than it's been, because historically executives didn't want good security, they wanted good enough security. So the fact that executives are getting interested and involved and cautious is very good. But that says that 53% did not take any action. That's bad. So I look at this as sort of a glass half full kind of example. What types of actions did they take? Well, they increased budgets, they increased training, they increased communication with the security team. They asked the security team to hire third parties to do security penetration testing or assessment, so those kinds of things. 41% of organizations provided additional training for their security staff. Once again, that's good. We find, and especially true, that IT security skills are very scarce right now, and this is especially pronounced in the federal government. And our research bears that out, as does other research, like the Center for Strategic International Studies report at the end of last year. 40% have changed existing processes or added new processes. So they're doing things like they're monitoring log files more. They're doing more vulnerability scans. They're monitoring user behavior more. They are looking at network traffic for anomalies and suspicious behavior. So they're doing a lot of those kinds of things, again, in reaction to APTs. 39% have purchased new technologies, like encryption technologies, security intelligence management tools, log management tools, database security tools, and 32% have provided additional training for non-IT employees, and that's obviously critical because non-IT employees often represent a weak link in security. So moving on to my next slide, this actually relates to what I was just saying. We wanted to understand where people felt that they were strong and where they were weak in terms of security skills and processes. Now this is difficult to read, I know. Blue represents where people thought they were excellent, yellow good, green fair, orange poor, and blue don't know. I'm going to take you to the bottom of this slide at first. I just mentioned, and this is often the case, that people are the weakest link in the security chain. You can see that in both the question or the area of non-IT employees' general security knowledge and non-IT employees' knowledge about APT concepts like social engineering, there's a fairly hefty population that says either fair or poor. So it is 49% for general security skills and 55% for non-IT employees' knowledge about concepts like APTs. So our non-IT employees represent a weak link. We have to realize that. We can train them, but we have to treat them like they're going to make mistakes and put the right controls in place. You also see a couple of other areas of particular concern where 18% felt that they were poor in terms of their ability to analyze and detect an attack in progress. They don't have the right skills. They're not getting the right information. They don't have the analysis tools or the correlation tools to isolate where a real event, a real security event is happening. About 17% were either fair or poor in their ability to remediate a compromised systems. Monitoring network traffic at the ingress and ingress points wasn't very good. So you see that there are areas of weakness, especially around skills and especially around collecting, normalizing, analyzing data as it relates to attacks in progress. In this slide, what I'm showing is the sources that were used to detect cyber attacks. So while it's important to do the right risk management steps, in fact, I blogged about this today on my Network World blog, it's important to protect or to lock down the infrastructure, but it's also important to understand that you will be attacked. So how do people detect those attacks? And you can see they use a number of different sources, including network management tools, log file analysis, IDS, IPS alerts, help desk calls, SIEM platforms, etc. That's a lot of different tools. That's a lot of different data. And if there are different people managing those tools, different skills, you're manually piecing together the status of security across your organization. That doesn't work. And my belief is that the security industry will change because that doesn't work. There'll be new tools, much more integration, much more scalability, better analytics. Think of this as a big data problem because it is. And that's where we're going with this. Just a quick note, because I have this slide here. We looked at this data through our segmentation model. And a couple things I wanted to point out. One is that you can see that the organizations most prepared for APTs are the ones most likely to use SIEM platforms as a means for determining whether the organization's under cyber attack. Now, why is that? I'd say because those most prepared organizations appreciate the value of the SIEM platform. They're using SIEM as sort of the nexus of all of this data collection and analysis. And they've got the scalable tools and analytics built in to actually get value out of that. So if an SIEM platform can do things like take in network flow data from the network, if it can look at layer 4 through 7 data, it's going to give you a much richer picture of the enterprise and security intelligence around the enterprise than some lesser tools. So the most prepared companies recognize that. They're using these tools more fully. You can see that some of the other things that people are doing are they're probably using log file analysis as a proxy for a SIM. That's great in a small enterprise. It doesn't scale. There are tools you can use to automate that, but if you have analysts looking at logs, that won't scale for the kinds of threats that we now face. So now, looking at incident response here, we wanted to understand what are the greatest challenges in terms of incident response. And again, it sort of boils down to things like skills and analysis tools and analytics. So you can see the 32%, it was really a skills thing, skills with computer forensics, network forensics, security forensics. These are advanced security skills. It's hard to recruit those people. A lot of the tools to automate that process aren't very good or advanced. so people are struggling with that. Just general technical skills, that's a problem. The incident response team ability to gather relevant information, that's a problem. Why? Because that information is stored in so many different repositories, and so sorting through that or even collecting that or centralizing that has proven to be extremely difficult. And then you have some other things that are more related to either management's lack of buy-in or the lack of a process. And that's a fundamental problem that I see, is that even companies that are very good at incident response have a fundamental problem in that when they detect an incident, they really don't have the business processes in place to move forward with that. So what does the legal team do? What does the executive management team do? What should the PR people or the public relation or the public affairs people say to the outside world? And how do you report to the compliance agencies? They don't have the processes there, which means that they waste time, and in this case, time is really money and damage. So just to conclude, a couple of concluding slides. First, the bigger truth is the standard ESG close. I talked about APTs being very real, pervasive, and dangerous. I think that I made that case pretty clearly, but I'm surprised people are still doubting this. I know that in Washington, there's this whole notion of APTs being created by what's called the cyber-industrial complex. That's completely untrue. These things are real, and certainly we have the data to back that up. What we see is that vulnerabilities are ubiquitous, and these are vulnerabilities across the spectrum: application vulnerabilities, network vulnerabilities, lack of training for people, system configuration, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a holistic problem that needs a holistic solution. Risk management is very, very good. I love the SANS 20 critical security controls. That's a great start. But risk management has to be supported with strong incident response. We have to operate under the philosophy that we want to make it as difficult as possible for the bad guys to penetrate our network, but they're going to do it. So we have to be able to catch them when they do. And then I mentioned this, but security intelligence suffers from just too many tools, very tactical tools looking at a particular threat or a particular network or a particular technology. There are too few skills. We just don't have the people who have these analytic skills and who can sort out and find the needle in the haystack that says we're under attack. And we really suffer in the security world from an old mindset, which is tactically focused, threat management focused, and technologies that support that mindset. So the time for action, we believe, is now, and we think this data, we hope this data is a call to action. In terms of what you should do, in the report there's a number of pages and recommendations that I sort of summarize here, but it's got to start with a full and honest, let's say, a security assessment. So where's our critical data? How are our users accessing the network? How are all the security controls configured? What's our change management process? What's our configuration management process? What are the safeguards along the way, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to look across the board at threats, vulnerabilities. We have to do penetration testing, get third parties to do this. We need better skills, et cetera. We really need to think about this as a layered defense mentality. Now, I know this, I'm preaching to the choir here. Security professionals think in these terms. There is no APT silver bullet. What we have to do is look at our enterprise, as I say, harden it with risk management, but be real smart about collecting and analyzing the data that would tell us that everything's running normally or that we're under attack. All this data is important. As I say, we have to capture it. We have to retain it for months. It could be years worth of data. We keep it around for analysis, for forensics, for compliance reasons, and we will capture and retain more and more data for security moving forward. As I mentioned, it's a big data problem. We need big data solutions. And in terms of incident response specifically, we found weaknesses in our research and detection, analysis, forensic skills, and in processes. As I mentioned, how do you escalate when an incident does happen? How does that escalate? How do we tell the world about that? So all of those things need to be addressed. So I hope that shed some light on our research. I'm around for some Q&A, and now let me turn it back over to the moderator.
Thank you very much, John, for an informative discussion on a very important topic. We are now going to be joined by Mel Shakir, who is CTO of NitroSecurity. Mel, welcome to the webcast.
Thank you, and thank you, John, and good afternoon to all of you, and good morning to those of you who are on the West Coast. Well, as John mentioned, advanced threats are a reality, and you need to invest in both technology and human capital to combat it effectively. So I have a prescription here for you, just like John did. Invest in smarter, faster weapons. Expect the unexpected. Protect what matters. And it's not your battle to fight alone. And here's actually where I got the prescription, because you never know when it's going to rain. Now, jokes aside, first and foremost, you need actionable intelligence and not just security data, like John pointed out. I'm not saying you don't need the entire gamut of security products. You probably already have firewalls, IDSs, IPSs, virus and anti-malware, DLP, VA scanners, config management products. Of course, these are all needed as they build up your layers of defense. But to make information truly actionable, you need the central command and control, and this is what an SIEM platform provides. This is what I really meant by the smarter and faster weapons. A SIM is a tool you simply cannot do without when combating advanced threats. For those of you who heard the term SIEM for the first time, it stands for Security Information and Event Management. Many top vendors call their SIMs an Enterprise Security Manager. Now, SIMs aggregate logs from all your sources into a central place in near real time. They parse out nuggets of valuable information from the logs. They normalize and categorize this information into a common taxonomy and apply context and intelligence to make that data truly actionable. When it sees an IP in a log file, for example, it infers the host name or geolocation, whether it's an internal or an external source. And when it sees a user, it infers the user's roles, entitlements, locations, maybe his cubicle, his aliases, and even his manager. The correlation pieces distinct events together. For example, many failed logins followed by a successful login from the same source, suggesting a successful brute force attack, or raising an alarm when an exploit is detected against a host deemed susceptible to that exploit from an earlier VA scan. So the SIM essentially stitches all the pieces together, and what you now have, and so what and how big are the threats, where are they coming from, what is my exposure, and how can I best react to this threat? In the SIM world, we call this situational awareness. Now, we took our SIM to the next level, by tapping the network for more information that may not be in logs or is not being logged for some reason. And here are some examples. You may have malware infected hosts, which is behaving as a web server just for an instant to download new instructions. Now, do you have a log file for that? No. If it's a zero-day exploit, you may not have a log event which says that user clicked on a PDF with an embedded executable. Do you log webmail, chat activity, P2P file transfer activity from an instant message session or from malware? You don't. Does your database log tell you what the results of a database query, that the results of a database query had 1,000 social security numbers in it? No, that's not logged anywhere. None of this information is in logs, but you can complement your logs with network intelligence, and that's what we did. That is, monitor content and documents that are exchanged, look at the response of database transactions, monitor instant message conversations and webmail messages, and capture net flows to stitch the flows together. So content-aware SIM uses techniques like protocol classification, deep packet inspection, application and document discovery, document reconstruction, and even session replay. Yes, you need content awareness to combat advanced threats. And you can get that in a content-aware SIEM. Now, let's talk a little bit beyond rules. So all SIEMs provide a rule-based correlation engine, and this works well and good when signatures and attack vectors are well known. So here's the part about how to deal with the unexpected. Now, instead of attempting to write rules for unknown attack vectors, you can take a more prudent approach by assigning weights to attributes that matter and continuously score the events that represent those attributes. For example, you may assign a higher weight for admin users because of the privileges or assets with critical data. And sources from rogue countries may have higher weights. Open ports for critical applications may have a higher weight due to the sensitive nature of the data contained within the application. More than one attribute can also be paired, and a risk score can be assigned dynamically to better model after your enterprise risk. So for example, users and applications can be paired to learn the activity trends of users against critical applications. Or you can simply trend the activity of high-risk users against critical applications. Let's look at the Nitro risk scoring model, which is part of our SIEM solution, a little more closely. So imagine, if you will, that the circles in these pictures represent a correlation instance. And that is a living alert with thresholds like hot and warm and cold, much like a thermometer. Okay. Also note that the risk score is constantly increasing as new activity occurs, and you can trigger alarms based on thresholds or deviations from a normal baseline. The risk score will also decay if the activity ceases, but it still leaves a high watermark, so the period of anomaly is highlighted and then can be analyzed. So here's a more specific example on how you can truly model enterprise risk. Let's say in a classified environment, your risk may be higher from certain projects or people with specific levels of clearance or certain project codes. Okay? Now, security teams can be on a higher alert when risk score rises as a result of activity associated with these specific project codes. Here's also an HR example that applies to all verticals. You're always trending activity of administrative users against critical applications, but the risk score will go through the roof if anyone on the vacation list, for example, or someone that fared poorly in a recent evaluation result, or somebody that recently resigned, accessed one of those critical systems. Okay. Now you're using the SIEM not only to do traditional monitoring of computing infrastructure and risk, and the risk to it thereof, but also model after business risks, enterprise risks that truly affect the bottom line. This is what I meant when I said protect what matters. And risk correlation is truly an innovative approach or an innovative way to find unusual activity, a must-have feature in your battle against advanced threats. Now, my final prescription is more of a message to all stakeholders. Security teams cannot fight this battle alone. When you're at an airport, you hear an announcement to the effect, say something when you see something, right? It may be the security team's full-time job, but you are a stakeholder because it's also about keeping you safe, right? Also the SOC could definitely use assistance with some types of data sources. For example, an application subject matter expert can provide immense value in spotting abnormal application events or trends. The privacy officer knows the rules of privacy misconduct better than anyone else, and the DBA and the sysadmin knows best the systems and the databases they manage daily. So a good SIEM provides a collaboration framework, giving each group appropriate access levels to participate to improve enterprise security. Okay. In addition to technologies, more eyes are a key to finding and combating advanced threats. So a quick overview of the NitroSecurity solution. Everything I said so far comes in one solution we call NitroView Enterprise Security Manager, or a content-aware SIEM, which comprises of a console and specialized collectors. Some of them collect logs from your environment. Others tap the network for intelligence, and the correlation engines, rule-based, risk-based, historical, they all work together as a single comprehensive solution. See, now we have a polling question for you.
Thanks, Mel. And we do have our second poll question for the audience, and that question will appear on your screen. The question is, does your organization have a security information and event management platform implemented today? So pick the answer that fits your organization. Is it yes, no, but implementing in 2012, no, but investigating for 2012, or no, you have no plans to look at it? So again, which answer best fits your organization? Does your organization have a SIEM implemented today? And we'll pause here while our audience responds to that question, and we will let you know the results once they are tabulated. So again, do you have a security information and event management solution in place? And the results, 50% say yes, 23.8% say no, but they are looking at it for 2012. Next most popular answer at 15.4% is no, no plans to look at it at all. And then 10.7% say no, but currently implementing the solution in 2012. So Mel, some interesting results.
Okay. Okay, let's move on. So our first and foremost task, following the McAfee acquisition, is integration of the McAfee global threat intelligence technology into NitroView. The collective intelligence that comes from millions of McAfee sensors and gateways deployed globally with reputation information about bad actors, IP addresses, websites and domains, files and messages, is critical to keeping out dangerous traffic from your network. Not only can NitroView ESM provide the full historical context of bad actors on your networks, it provides critical countermeasure analysis against threats. Now, policy orchestration. For all your endpoints, using ePolicy Orchestrator and EPO agents, providing accurate scores based on the assets configuration, the application control, file integrity, or policy adherence or violation thereof, with the intelligence derived from the SIEM and the GTI sources and the risk analyzers like the Nitro Risk that we talked about and the McAfee Risk Advisor. They all help with the detection and rapid countermeasure and remediation of the threats. And that's how the full picture completes. We call this situational aware risk management. So now let's quickly take a look at a few use cases. So this is one which talks about sensitive documents leaked from a database. So you can extrapolate, for example, to WikiLeaks or something else. So content-aware SIEM, for example, will produce many relevant alarms. It can look in the response of a database transaction and infer how many rows of sensitive records were accessed and trigger an alarm if a threshold is exceeded. It can trigger if sensitive data in an attachment is being sent out to an external address using an alternative mail, such as webmail. But that's not all. The entire SQL session history, including the details from all the transactions, every query, even the ones that did not trigger any alerts, are also captured for forensics. The MIME decoded email records, complete with the from and to address, the subject and message, and even the document itself that is attached to the message are captured. The entire instant message session data and a transcript of the conversation dialogue between two parties, that itself has been captured. So a lot of this information may not have been in the logs, but the connection is made by a content-aware SIEM between different data streams, logs and network packet inspection sources to provide the complete activity trail. Now here's another use case when an endpoint gets infected because a user inadvertently got fooled into clicking on a malicious document. It happens all the time, right? Now, if the IP file message, they already had a reputation score because it was seen before, it probably got blocked already by your McAfee web gateway if you had one. If you didn't have a GTI-enabled gateway, then it probably made its way in, and now it is being stuck. It's being attempted to be stopped by the HIPS agent at the endpoint. Now, if that fails to quarantine the threat, which happens all the time, you have a potentially compromised system. All the events from GTI, HIPS, are in the SIM at this point. And by reviewing current and historical data, the SIM can provide all the information on who the infected target communicated with, in turn, and potentially infecting them. Your target and the attack surface are now quite clear, so you can start your remediation process. Okay. Now, in my final advanced use case, I want to show you a use case using screenshots of NitroView. And I'll make this a little quick. So here's the advanced use case where we want to detect the HTTP command and control spam bots. Okay? And a content-aware SIM can utilize broad correlation, normalization, content awareness, all of this together to detect these advanced threats. And here's the logic we're going to apply. So we could be looking for any web activity which is coming from something that you have not classified as your web server. And in a short interval of 10 minutes, let's say, if a malware event is followed by HTTP activity not from your web server, still on port 80 or any one of the web ports, similarly, SMTP activity not from your SMTP server, the one that you classified as your SMTP server, if those things happen in a short interval of time, and if both of them happen in a short interval of time, then there's a good possibility that HTTP, the HTTP command and control is being was what you detected, and what you have on your hands is a spam bot. Okay. So once you write the SIM rules, and I didn't want to get into that level of detail here, but in these screenshots you will appreciate that the SIM is reporting back one event as very, very critical. It's saying it possibly detected the HTTP command and control spam bot over everything else, because now it has really deemed it to be critical because of the nature of the attack. And if you look closely, there are the other correlated events of lesser severity, which actually bubbled up into another event, into the previous event of a higher severity. Okay. Now, in NitroView, for example, when the SOC operator clicks on any one of these events, he's able to quickly start and drill down and see what was the source IP, what was the destination IP that was resulting in this. And this is actually a way in which the investigation gets conducted by the SOC teams using NitroView. Okay. So as he's expanded investigation, he says that this event, the HTTP command and control, was triggered off because of events coming from three different sources. One came from the firewall, which suggested that spam activity was blocked. The other came from an IDS or an IPS, which suggested that, hey, I just saw a Trojan. And the third actually came from a layer 7 tool, the NitroView ADM, which suggested that I just saw HTTP activity from something that you didn't classify as your web server. And all of these three things got correlated very, very quickly in NitroView to come to that inference. Okay. I'm just going to scroll through these a little bit fast because of the sake of time. We want to leave some time for questions. Okay. And here's, in this view, it's applying the geolocation context, additional intelligence that you need when you are making decisions. And I just wanted to run quickly, to the final slide. Right. So the final slide over here is essentially showing you that I've gone through all the steps to try to understand what the data was, and then I start looking and drilling down into actually the packet level detail, right? And I'm translating the packet level detail into something that a human being can understand. And when I look at this information more closely, I can see what is really happening. I can see the HTTP activity. I can see the executables that are being transported. I can see the internal and external IP addresses. I can even see things that I would have not known before by just looking at the packets. For example, Windows was spelled incorrectly. Now, what are the odds that Microsoft is going to spell Windows incorrectly in Internet Explorer, right? The odds are minimal. So these are probably crafted packets. So this is the kind of analytics and the deep level of information that the SOC team can get through in just a few mouse clicks. At that point, I'd like to conclude with this one last slide. I'd just like to say that a SIM will play a pivotal role in your fight against advanced threats. Also, don't do yourself a disservice by leaving behind any data sources. The more data you have, as John pointed out, the better you are. Don't be afraid of this space because that is cheap. You can't decide what to or not to collect before the investigation. You don't want to walk into a crime scene and pick only some pieces of evidence. You have to take it all. And from that standpoint, you will need a solution that can deal with enormous volumes of data. A large amount of historical context is critical for spotting trends. For SIM vendors, as John again pointed out, it is as much a data management problem as it is about applying intelligence. And NitroView definitely excels in both these areas. So thank you for listening, and let's open it up for questions.
Thanks, Mel, and thanks, John, for an informative discussion on an important and timely topic. We have now reached the Q&A portion of today's webcast. We do have a number of questions in the queue that we'll get to momentarily. I just want to remind the audience that if you want to submit a question, to look for the Ask a Question console. And now let's get to our first question. This one having to do with countermeasure analysis. Question is, will countermeasure analysis usually be concluded with countermeasure activation and APT elimination? Mel and John, who wants to take a stab at that one?
John, you want to take a crack at it? Or?
No, go ahead, Mel.
Okay. So let me take a stab at this. Well, so, one of the things, what we talked about today is situational awareness, right? So once you have situational awareness, then you know where you can focus your efforts to do your countermeasure analysis. Now, does that mean that APT has been eliminated? Well, it totally depends on, the level of the investigation, how much, effort you have put in. But at the end of the day, you're going to be relying on tools to come back and tell you where to focus your threats. And that is what the SIMs and other tools are going to be provide you with. Will you have completely eliminated APT at that point? It's subjective, but that's the goal.
Very good. And we'll move on to the next question. This one having to do with real-time system configuration changes. And the question from the audience is, what about detecting real-time system configuration changes, such as unexpected Windows registry changes, ACLs, etc.? This is a big problem in our clients' environments. Does NitroSecurity collect and track this data?
And the answer is yes. But remember, NitroSecurity is a SIM. And now that we are part of the McAfee team, the endpoint agent story, of course, is a very, very strong story. So McAfee has some of the best endpoint agents, and through their e-policy orchestration software, and the integration of these products thereof, which already exists, you get exactly that kind of information. And it's not just limited to registry changes. It could be application control. It can be integrity of files, configuration changes, and lots of other things.
Thanks, Mel. And John, next question is for you. This one having to do with, trying to be a little bit more proactive in approach. And question from the audience is, how do we get our organization to move forward from a threat management focus to a threat mitigation focus and be more proactive in our posturing to avoid and defeat APT before it's too late?
I think you have to start by understanding APTs and the way they penetrate a network and the way they evolve, because it will evolve intelligence in a number of areas, including the desktops, including the networks, including different hosts, probably different user authentication behavior, and then ultimately access of the data and then exfiltration of the data to an external server. So understanding all of the areas that you have to monitor and then understanding how you're monitoring those things today. So typically in a threat management type of environment, you're managing all of those threats uniquely. And what you need is much more of a end-to-end picture. Now that involves collecting the data, analyzing the data, being able to understand what the data is telling you, and then reacting. So it will take a while to move in those in a different direction, but I'd say that the way I'd start or recommend to start is to really understand all of the ramifications and all of the evolutionary phases of an APT or sophisticated attack, and then understand just how you're analyzing or detecting events today, and if there's any integration between those things or not. And then complement that by just doing a self-assessment and really thinking about whether you have the skills to be able to detect those events, because they can be very subtle. Mel, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's good.
Very good. We've got about a minute or so left. Let's see if we can fit in another question. This one having to do with geolocation data, Mel, and the question is, does NitroView correlate geolocation data as well as logs and events?
Yeah, absolutely. And I showed you an example earlier where it correlated some geolocation data, but that's not it. It adds a lot of additional intelligence on top of it: identity data, content data, lots of other things that you can pull. You can pull your enterprise sources. I gave you examples of that, to be able to add intelligence to the events, because not all information is in the log, and you have to rely on other sources that actually give you a better risk indicator in your enterprise, right? So whether it is a VA scan that's telling you that the system is unpatched and vulnerable, or whether it's your HR system, it's saying that this employee doesn't have a good evaluation report, or somebody with a lower clearance level is accessing some highly sensitive data, maybe just because they had some misconfigured privileges. All of that context is important, in addition to the geolocation, of course, which can be critical.
Well, thanks again, John and Mel, for your participation today. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm afraid we've reached the conclusion of today's webcast. I want to thank NitroSecurity for sponsoring today's event, and I want to thank the audience for joining today. In addition, in the next day or two, we will be emailing to everyone a link to an archived version of this webcast so you can review it or pass it along to a colleague. Thank you very much for attending, and this concludes today's webcast.